Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for August 14, 2017. Hello. What? We'll begin with a special order calendar decision items. Item number 1, 33605BZ, 495 Broadway, Manhattan.
Okay. They did send some information in, but my notes say that the floor plans were supposed to have been revised to indicate that fire safety measures have been installed as opposed to should be installed, but otherwise the other issues were addressed, so if they could make instant changes to the plan, that would be good. Maybe Jello, you could call. Okay. Anybody on the other comment?
Continued hearing items. Item number 2, 55851BZ, 6822 Northern Boulevard, Queens.
Okay, at the last hearing, we asked that a few things be done before we would decide on this. They included remove the illegal sign to show proof that it had been done, reconcile signage between the statement of facts and the analysis, stripe the parking lot to make the ADA symbol more visible, and show a photo of that fact and install the trash enclosure according to the approved plans. They didn't, as far as I can tell, show us any of that. Is there an update, anybody? No? Okay. Did anybody find that evidence?
You did put on your trash photo.
The drawing of the trash enclosure, they didn't do the work, right? But they didn't show any of that other work done. You know, they were supposed to install the trash enclosure for the last approval, and so it's something that really should be done now. But I think they need a permit to do it, so it may take some time. Okay.
Item number 3, I'm sorry, may I have one?
Yeah.
82259BZ, 1774 Victory Boulevard, Staten Island. We got a partial submission.
Yeah, partial submissions, which I thought was extremely unsatisfactory. The site is now out of compliance with the grant, which was made prior to the application, so it was out of compliance with the grant that was made prior to this application. And this owner claims it has no site control, so it had no authority actually to even apply in the first place for the initial application because it claimed an authority it didn't have. However, it makes no sense that it has no authority. They're the owner of the property. Every owner of the property is responsible for compliance with the law, and to make excuses that they can't enforce against their tenant is absolutely incorrect. And so they need to, and I should say that we have the authority, and we can well do, and rescind the approval that was probably improperly granted by this body because it didn't know that the applicant didn't have the authority. And then they'll have to start all over again. So time to enforce against the tenant. As the landlord, you have to do that. And I should just say that my inclination, just because we're not seeing any cooperation from this applicant, is to deny the extension. And unless we see some real action quickly. They need to provide the deed also, because again, I'm not sure they even are the property owner. Maybe they're just a contract vendee. And we should also get a letter from the Department of Transportation about its intentions with respect to the widening of Victory Boulevard, because the applicant's making a statement about that, but I don't know what that's based on. And the client and the operator should attend this. The client being the owner of the property, and the operator, if it's possible, to get them to attend. Any other comments on this? Okay.
Item number 4, 17494BZ, 9907 Roosevelt Avenue, Queens.
The signage calculations and drawings were revised, and I just want to, this is a note to council. A note should be added with respect to the advertising sign. that in terms of the resolution, that the BSA has made no determination as to the legality of advertising signs on the zoning lot located in an R6B C14 zoning district. Accessory signs must comply with C14 zoning regulations. Okay, so they're claiming that it's a legal sign. We're not opining on that. The photos did show the barbed wire removed, new slatting and landscaping installed. The landscaping is weedy. You're supposed to weed around your landscaping. So also, I just want to make sure that the landscaping is not on city property. It looks like it is, but if you look at the old photographs, there was always a little grassy area in front of the fence, so maybe, and they're just planting in that grassy area, so whatever it is, it's been there for a long time. I don't know, I know they have a DOT violations for lack of maintenance of the sidewalk, but I don't know if DOT considers that portion the sidewalk or not. I didn't check it against the flag diagrams. And then they did provide a letter from a nearby business permitting employees of the subject site to use their restroom. So I think they fixed up the site, and that's it, right? Yeah? Okay.
Item number 5, 20197BZ, 11902 Rockaway Boulevard, Queens, received a recent submission.
Yeah, a photo of the trash enclosure, washed and painted. Looks actually quite good now. I didn't realize that that was a finished block, because normally you don't stucco a finished block, but it looks so bad that painting it is the only way to go. And so I think everything looks much better as a result of everything we've done, and the owner's been very cooperative. I appreciate that. So I think we're good.
So in lieu of the stucco, you're fine with the exceptions?
You know, the stucco we usually put on an unfinished block, and the photographs may look like it was really poor quality unfinished block. It turns out it's one of those extra costly finished blocks that's just not been maintained. So painting is the only way you can go. Okay.
Item number 6, 15908BZ, 6870 Spring Street, Manhattan.
Sorry, I just lost it. Here. Okay, they submitted on July 11th a revised Phase 1 environmental assessment, and requesting that DEP review to determine whether a Phase 2 continues to be necessary. And Phase 2 reviewed the materials on August 4th, determined that a Phase 2 is required. I don't know whether an E-designation is possible in this situation, and that's whether that be something that would be entertained. Otherwise, they need to prepare the work plan and the HASP and submit for DEP review, right? Okay.
New cases, item number 7, 54967BZ, 7-9 Elm Tree Lane, the Bronx.
Okay, again, it's a new case, so we have proof of service of the initial application to officials, but I actually didn't find the notice of hearing to officials, and obviously we'll have to postpone the hearing unless that's produced. We also need a community board recommendation. This was a variance to continue the non-conforming use in spite of its lapse by more than 2 years, and to allow structural changes to the site. The 1968 approval placed a 5-year term on it that constantly renews every 5 years, or they come back and renew on every 5 years. The 1989 grant had more conditions than were mentioned in the compliance chart. I'd like to know whether these have been complied with. And there's an affidavit that was referred to in the 1985 grant. What is that? Provide us a copy. The existing conditions drawing is also really difficult to understand. They just replicated a difficult to understand drawing that has been previously submitted to the board. They need to clarify the property lines and show where the residential buildings are located. It reads that there is actually a house on the same lot as the use group 17 property. Maybe it is, but I don't know. They need to clarify. Because in fact, the layout actually isn't consistent with Google Earth imagery. If you look at Google Earth, the buildings sit differently on the lot than that site plan. So I don't really know what's right. They should provide photos also showing the boundaries between the subject lot and the adjacent residential properties. They have to actually go on and walk around the perimeter and take photographs. And I'd like to know whether the residential neighbor adjacent has been notified of the hearing. And if not, it should be, since the conditions, if you look at the conditions that were put on the site by the prior board, there was obviously a concern about the adjacent resident. And we also don't have community board recommendations, so we don't know what somebody might have said at a community board hearing. Anything else?
I just think that the application could be a lot clearer as to which of the three buildings is actually the subject of the variance, because I had to sit there and just look at the plot plan and try and figure out what was there that was as of right and what's new and what was, so they could actually, simplify the application. And I also felt it would be helpful if they would tell us at least how far everything is from the proposed residential building in feet. And, I know two of the buildings are as of right, and so I guess they would argue back that they don't need that, but it would just give us a greater idea of the overall impact, because one of the conditions is that nothing be stored outside, and they are storing mulch,
Yes.
and it looks like a mulch mountain that they're storing, so it would be helpful to know just what kind of impact that's going to have on that neighbor.
Yeah, actually, I was even concerned, not maybe in that location, it's not such of an issue, but mulch is a combustible, and I don't know what fire department does in those kinds of situations, so. But, this is an open area, it's like on the edge of New York City, like in the countryside. It's really kind of unusual location. Okay.
Ready? Item number 8, 16407 BZ, 280 Marsh Avenue, Staten Island.
Okay. And again, a new case, so we have proof of service of the initial application to officials, but again, I don't find notice of hearing to officials, so unless we get that, we can't have the hearing tomorrow. The community board recommends approval. They need to provide us with proof of installation and fire department inspection of the fire alarm and sprinklers. I can't tell whether the fire department requires sprinklers or required sprinklers. They provided massage licenses, many of them, but a few of them have expired, so those have to be updated. Any others? No? Okay.
Appeals calendar, item number 9, 10, and 11, 16 and 19 Tuttle Street and 18 Tuttle Street, Staten Island. So you see out 36.
Yep, okay, so we have proof of notice of hearings to officials and proof of service of the initial application also to officials. Community board recommended approval with 25 in favor, 6 opposed, and 2 abstaining. And fire department had the following conditions: an easement shall be in place allowing emergency vehicle access across all the lots which abut the new portion of the private street known as Tuttle. All proposed residences must be fully sprinklered, and a hydrant must be located within 250 feet of all main front entrances. I believe the plans do show the hydrant and sprinklering, but I didn't see any sign of an easement, so they need to show us that or explain why they're not providing it and whether fire department signed off on that. 18 Tuttle is a 70-foot wide lot. that has frontage on as yet unimproved Home Place. The drawing, though, gives the impression that Home Place will be continued and that the builder's pavement plan shows that. So that will connect the improved portions on either side of the unimproved lot to the other, so that will continue Home Place all the way through. I want to make sure that that's actually what the intention is. And since Home Place is a map street, I'm not sure why 18 Tuttle, Lot 92, needs a waiver. And also, from an urbanism perspective, why is it turning its back on Home Place? I think that's very strange. So, all the other houses are marching along Home Place, and this one reverses, yeah.
Either way, either on Tuttle or on Home, but that,
That's a cul-de-sac that's being created, right? So it's not really turning its back on Tuttle.
But I think we told them that we thought that they should need the waiver.
Say it again, I can't hear you.
I think we discussed this and we thought that they should need the waiver.
They should get the waiver because don't they have that's what I don't understand. They have frontage on
You're
Map
gonna tell them to
Street.
turn it around and they needed frontage from the back of Home, I think it was. My notes, I'm sorry.
Because the back is to Home Place, like in the way.
so if you
That
have a
the
front
tree is
lawn,
facing the
I thought there's a waiver that they, by turning it towards Tuttle, then you require to provide less amount of.
Can we turn the AC down? I don't think, it's really hard to hear, and we know these review sessions, sometimes people can't understand what was said.
I would like some clarification as to why.
Speak up.
I also would like some clarification as to why the building, the lot 92, the building proposed on lot 92 is being turned on Tuttle as opposed to Home. There was an explanation given, but it wasn't quite clear as to, that's much better.
Yeah.
I can hear myself.
Yeah.
But it wasn't quite clear why, by providing a frontage on Tuttle, therefore it would be it would not have to provide certain amount of open space or requirement, which from a zoning review, from the text review, it wasn't quite clear. So I would like the applicant to walk us through that reasoning. And from an urbanistic, from a neighborhood point of view, I think the way the treatment can be done is, instead of providing that hedge on the entirely, it could be maybe a lower hedge that reduces its appearance as a wall. I think right now the plan almost seems like it's going to be a high fenced kind of a wall, which does create a variation on that street
They
frontage.
cited to a section in the zoning resolution that's requiring that they have a hedge because of the depth of the front, what they're calling the front yard.
right.
But it's actually a rear yard, if you look at which is the front of the house, which underlines or underscores for me that the house is facing the wrong way. And if you want to actually drive your car up from Tuttle, because that's maybe where you prefer to have your driveway or something, I don't know why you would, because it's more convenient to come from Home Place than down from Tuttle. So I'm not understanding the urbanism decision, and anyway, because this is part of a development that includes those 3 houses on Home Place, it's not like the developer's creating this little cul-de-sac and he wants that to be the new town development kind of thing. It's sort of spreading the houses out on different streets. So it just doesn't make sense to me on a lot of levels. And then the other thing is the developer or the applicant states that this little Tuttle extension is a private road as defined in the zoning resolution. I actually don't think it is, since it serves only 2 residences that are located wholly beyond 50 feet of a street line. That's the definition of a private road, that it needs to have 3 residences wholly beyond 50
And that's
feet.
probably the reason why the 92 is fronting Tuttle.
But it's not wholly beyond. Half of the lot, half of the building is within 50 feet of home place. It's, yeah, it has to be wholly beyond the 50 feet. So, and I don't know why you would want it to be a private road anyway, because then there are more rules. So,
Okay.
unless you need it to be a private road in order to, I don't know. We don't have them, they're often not private roads, by the definition of private.
We and the fire department may prefer that they be treated like private roads. The width and other requirements are greater in Staten Island.
Well, but that's independent of whether it's a quote private road, or it can just be that the fire department requires that it be the continuation of Tuttle Street, which is a map street. This is just a little extension of a map street, so it has to be the same width as it continues. So, no matter what, it's still privately owned because it's a D-map street, actually. It had been mapped and then got D-mapped for some reason, not explained, like in the 60s. So, and then they did provide that, they also provided that sort of follow-up map, so there's a borough president's map and there's a detail map of the D-mapping that they provided, that was good. They should provide more information on the total scope of the development, just from trying to figure it out. It looks like there's 3 houses on Home Place and 3 accessing from Tuttle. I'd like to know if that's the full scope of the development. Is there more going on that's not being described to us? Lot 40, so on the RP 604 that they submitted to get the subdivisions of the tax lot numbers, there's also a lot 40. So we'd like to know if that's part of the development, because then that's expanding the development into more houses, and we are limiting the number of houses that can be considered under these DCL waivers. So, also DOT needs to review the sidewalk continuity. On Tuttle, it's actually quite strange. There's a place where you walk down Tuttle, then you have to go onto the street and walk around a bush and get back on the sidewalk. So and the bush is there to comply with some other kind of a zoning regulation. So zoning and DOT seem to be in conflict with each other, and that's not okay. And also, just for clarification on the drawings, there are these little squares that are sort of shown on the private road connected to each other with dashed lines. They don't match anything in the legend. They're probably drains, but they're not indicated as drains. And then we also have a restrictive declaration that was submitted, and our council needs to review. And my comment about the declaration is that, for one, they have, quote, an intent to form an owner's agreement. Intentions, best of intentions lead to the road of whatever leads to, right? So it can't be an intention, it shall form a homeowners association and shall execute prior to the C of O a homeowners agreement in form and substance substantially similar to that attached to this declaration, which will bind all successors and assigns to the terms of the agreement and shall require the following, and then we'll list the following. And a sample of the homeowners agreement should be attached to the declaration. So they have to get a sample homeowners agreement that is a good one, like, best in the business kind of homeowners agreement. Also, the declaration says, streetlights, if any. No, there's going to be streetlights that need to comply with DOT requirements. So what are DOT requirements? They should locate the streetlights according to DOT's requirements, and streetlights shall be installed according to DOT approved drawings. They also need to provide a draft of the easement that was requested by the fire department for fire department review. And that's the let's see, yeah. And then also, I didn't see the borough president. Did borough president opine on this application?
The borough president had sent us something on the Lot 92, but I don't have another letter.
Okay, I don't think I saw that. I'll look again, but, and what, you know what it said?
I don't have it in front of me, I'm
Oh, okay.
sorry.
Okay. Any other comments on this one? No. It's kind of complicated little site. Okay.
Zoning calendar decision items, item number 12, 33014BZ, 1746 East 21st Street, Brooklyn.
They requested a deferral until mid-September, pending resolution of an open DOB issue.
Item number 13, 2016-4136BZ and 2016-4137BZ, 49th Street, Queens.
We're going to need to reopen this because we got a pretty extensive new submission. We closed this at the June 6th hearing and left the record open for the applicant to respond to comments at that hearing that reflected the commissioner's concerns based on the materials provided that parking demand for the proposed uses actually exceeds what's required by the zoning resolution. The applicant responded with a change in use from all use group 4 ambulatory care to a mix now of 7,500 square feet of use group 4 ambulatory care and 5,000 square feet of use group 6 offices in order to lower the demand analysis. They also, which doesn't affect the required zoning, but zoning parking. And they also increased the amount of spaces in each building to 32 from the previously requested 18, including 13 double stackers with attendant parking, which was what we asked them to look at, so it was good that they looked at it. A revised parking analysis was also provided. However, in spite of all this, the analysis still shows a huge shortfall between what is provided and demand, and still exceeds what's required by the zoning resolution. Revised plans were submitted, though, that still show the use group 4 doctor's office as the use in the chart. So it's just not internally coordinated drawings. The applicant also submitted a letter from Councilmember Constantinidis in favor of a reduction in parking to 32 spaces per building, but mostly in support of the medical office use, and stating there is ample parking available in the area. Meanwhile, the community board's conditional approval asks that a less parking intensive use be conducted on the site, and that stackers be provided to meet demand, so the council member and the community board don't agree on this subject. And also, Commissioner Shanda went to the site and had trouble finding parking, according to my notes. Yes.
And it would have been above around 10 o'clock or so.
Okay, so the beginning of peak, but peak in this case goes from 9 till 4. Our comments during review sessions and at the hearings were very specific, and clear instructions were given on how the data could be improved and the case made stronger. The applicant revised the on-street parking availability maps, but they still don't show the day or date on which the study was conducted, and don't seem to clearly account for hours or days during which no parking is available. Either that or the color coding system is too subtle to be able to detect differences. For example, I didn't look at every single one, but I looked at one that was curious. For example, on 49th Street, between 19th and 20th Street, the key indicates that there's no standing at all and no parking on Wednesday between 11:30 and 1 on one side, and on the other, no parking on Thursday between 11:30 and 1. However, the availability map for the 12 to 1 time period shows 17 spaces available out of 67 legal spaces. So does that mean this thing was conducted on a Tuesday? And then that's not really representative of availability of parking, right? Further, there are, as was mentioned at the prior hearing, many curb cuts in this area, many houses that have their own parking pads. So it's hard to tell whether these were taken into account when the legal spaces were calculated, or whether they just literally measured the width of the curb of the street frontage and divided by 18 or something and came up with the parking spaces. The revised parking demand analysis was provided. That continues not to be internally consistent. It uses a medical office modal split of 27% auto, when the support data shows either 32% for Queens, 30% for East New York, 46% for Staten Island, and reverse journey to work for the census tract at 68.5. They didn't they didn't provide any modal split data for Flushing Commons, which is arguably the most similar to this site. The subject site, as we know, is in a very car-dependent area. There's very little public transportation there. However, I see in the plans where they're using a standard stacking system. So it's not one of those fancy automated turntable subterranean systems or anything like that. And so they're constrained by the existing column locations of a building that was built for a different purpose and never used for that purpose. So I couldn't actually figure out anywhere else to add the 3 stackers that would be necessary to bring it into compliance with zoning regulations. So I think I asked this at the last hearing. We really need to have a parking garage specialist come to the hearing. I didn't get the impression that the architect is that experienced in parking garage design. So I would like to hear from a garage specialist about possible alternate solutions to the stacker system, and from the applicant about alternate uses, actual uses, occupancies with lower parking requirements. And then that would perhaps be how you make your case that you get at least the waiver down to 32 spaces per building.
Maybe they need to add more general office space and decrease the ambulatory care space.
But that doesn't change so office is also 300, one space per 300 square feet. That just
Right, no, I mean, it
demand.
lowers the demand at least,
Yeah.
so it's more of it could be accommodated on site, that's what I meant.
Right. That's true. But I think the whole thing would need to turn to offices in order to do this.
I think the amount of space that would be left behind for ambulatory will not be a viable space at the end of it. I think the community board had recommended a daycare kind of facility that has a lower parking requirement, and also maybe there's a demand that we don't know, but that's a speculation on our part. But it is a step in the right direction where they are looking at a balance of use that does reduce the parking demand, and also by providing more stacker spaces. You're right. I agree with you. The structure of the building does prevent for flexibility in the layout of stackers. So it really becomes a question of how does the operation of this space occur so that it does not cause backup onto the sidewalks, vehicles waiting. And by reducing the use to something that is, by allowing for a commercial use, you're lessening the amount of the in and out. It's more of a one large mass in, one large mass out, with few visitors
You
coming in.
mean office use?
Office uses.
Yeah.
Right, so I think at the end, the applicant may have to look at something that has a more office
Right.
use. I agree with the
Yeah, but
Commissioner Brown.
but one of the things that gives me a little pause here is that, you don't, well, for one, without reminding ourselves about the zoning analysis, this was built as a house of worship, a community facility, so it may be over the allowable floor area for a strictly commercial office use. I just don't remember. So that may be one reason, because early on in the statement of facts, it says that there are not a lot of community facility uses permitted here. Meanwhile, it's a district where, I think it's an M district, right?
It's an M1.
Yeah, M1. So it's true that M1s don't have as broad a community facility opportunity as others. For instance, it could be a school. But if it were in a residence district or a commercial district, right? So that may be part of what's limiting it, but in terms of the demand analysis for office, we did this with another one where they started off with a lot of ambulatory care and they kept switching it out to office. And so, but the parking analysis was relying on office and we knew that it was going to be used as a doctor's office. So we said, you still have to run the numbers as a doctor's office. And in that case, that might have been the one where it turns out it's a doctor's office that's related to one a few blocks away. And so the modal splits and everything, the demand was completely different than the standard demand that you use here. So I'm not sure whether we get to believing that the demand is lower if it's strictly office, because we know the intention is to use it as medical, in which case there's lots of coming and going. So, yeah, unless we had a condition on approval that it can't be used as medical, but meanwhile, use group 6 allows medical offices. Right. So, not sure. Okay, so I mean, for me, I think that just having a specialist who really knows about the magic of parking, because we have had parking specialists who come in and they figure out how to fit 1 million cars in a tiny, tiny lot, maybe that would help. Okay.
Move on. Item number 14, 2016-4165 BZ, 5801 Amboy Road, Staten Island.
Okay. All right. We have July 7th comments from DOT. I'd like to know whether these were responded to and signed off.
We don't have a sign off yet, but the applicant has been working and they're very close. I'm hoping tomorrow.
I'm not sure. And there was a revised EAS submitted
Yes,
in
all the
July.
documents are in order. They revised the plans. They were checking the sight lines and going back and forth with the fences. And I believe DOT is close to getting this signed.
Okay. Okay, so let's see, I don't think there were any other comments. I know that I had any other comments. One of the things that they requested that we discussed a lot is about whether there would be a term on the drive-through. And I actually think, so this is a variance for the use, right? And the use happens to include a drive-through, but the use could exist without a drive-through if it arguably were a different chain, you know, that there are chains where they're not using drive-through. So I think the drive-through should be subject to the 5-year term, because how else can you have a check on whether it becomes a nuisance? But that's what I wanted to.
We can parse out elements and do,
Yeah, I mean, for instance, if it turns out the drive-through is a nuisance, then can't you say, okay, take out the drive-through and you still have your variance for commercial use?
Right, but in Staten Island, these types of fast food restaurants go hand in hand with drive-through, because this is a mostly vehicular owning, traveling group of people. It just doesn't, it seems like it would not be feasible if it didn't have a drive-through. It's located in an area that doesn't get a lot of pedestrian traffic. So if people can't access the site and park on site and either go in or do a drive-through and pick up their coffee and leave, I don't know if this would be feasible.
Well, if it was a 7-Eleven, for example, that doesn't have a drive-through business model, right? We see a lot of those. They park in the lot, and they go inside, and they get what they get from their 7-Eleven, right? So as far as I know, there's no business model for a 7-Eleven with a drive-through.
No, there
right?
isn't. So then you mean,
You'd still have the commercial use with the parking, but it wouldn't have the drive-through component, because that's the thing that's been the biggest concern on the site.
but can we not tie it to a use if there is a change in, let's say, operator, then they come to us?
Anything that didn't want the drive-through would come after
Right.
some kind of amendment from us.
That's if they didn't want it, but they would sell it with the drive-through.
Right. It strikes me that if we want to impose a term, perhaps we should just impose a term.
No,
That it's not dependent on the drive-through, because as Commissioner Brown says, the use in the drive-through, at least as they seem pretty linked right now. And so we're allowing the use, so
Right.
we impose terms for uses all the time.
Right, but I think one of the arguments that they made was it's hard to get financing and so on if you're limited to such a short term, and uses, we often give use variances that don't have such a short term. They're more like 10-year terms, right?
Right, but we've analyzed this as if it was a fast food with a drive-through, with the whole argument that if it was a fast food without a drive-through, it wouldn't be feasible. Because, number one, the property owner would probably have to construct this on their own and then go about getting a tenant, as opposed to getting a tenant to join in on the construction. And also, primarily because this is an area that really relies on the use of cars, no fast food restaurant would want to locate in a place where they would have to rely on people coming in and getting out of their cars and going in, especially for something that's like a convenience type of snacking food, like coffee, as opposed to, a full restaurant food. So I don't know, if we then try and split off the grant, how that would affect the feasibility.
Well, but isn't that the motivation then to maintain it properly and not be a nuisance? And, I mean, one of the things was DOT said, and this is driven in part, excuse the pun, by DOT saying there can't be more than 7 cars queuing. And if there are, then they have to have a site manager. And so what if it turns out to be chaos, they have 12 cars queuing, they never put a site manager out there, then they're becoming a nuisance.
That would be in our conditions, and if they were to have that sort of come again, then, we could have a compliance hearing, essentially.
I'm sure Ed Laurie will
Ed Laurie will be back. That's if he doesn't sell his house. That's if he doesn't sell his house.
Right, because I'm not sure that an investor would want to invest in a site that would be up for a review, that could be a review that would go against them simply because there were people in the neighborhood who didn't like it. Like, there's no control. They would have, even if they try to maintain it the best way they can, if it's up for review within 5 years, there's a chance they can lose it. And if there's a chance they can lose it within 5 years, they're not going to want to invest in it, because they're never going to make their money back. Because they're going to have to go in with the idea that they're going to lose it, not that they're going to keep it.
So then what are we talking about in terms of a term? 10 years?
Well, what would the standard term be? What do we usually approve
Under the
of?
special permit is 10.
Yeah, under special permit, it's 5 years, that's where 5 years came from.
Drive-through is 5 before.
Yeah,
this is
that's
a
where
variance.
this all came from. This was a discussion with Commissioner Montanez that sort of picking up and getting.
Yeah, but
So.
the financing, I guess it would be 10.
Yeah, and then the way we analyzed this from the point of view was, there was a version where they didn't have the drive-through.
Right, it got much less in.
Right,
We actually asked them.
But if this had been in a commercial district where drive-through special permits were available, they'd only have the drive-through for a 5-year term.
Yeah.
So that's the part I don't get. So that works for all of those special permit recipients somehow, where they're, we do, we have. We've had several since we've been here. Right, there were at least 3 that I can think of.
Yeah, but one could
Drinking
argue that
restaurant.
those cases are not necessarily subject to unique conditions that increase the development costs. And so therefore, if you want to add a drive-through on those because it's a special permit, it's fine if you limit that to 5 years, because it's not, the financials are not necessarily hinging on the inclusion of the
One
drive-through.
of the variances that have to be here, this really
So do we say a 10-year term? I'm just not thinking that it should be a permanent grant, because if it becomes a nuisance, it's in a residence district, gas stations have terms. This is probably as user-heavy as a gas station, right?
Like, one could argue that a gas station could have a far worse effect on its neighbors than a drive-through, just by mismanaging the site would lead to spills and all sorts
is
of
what
things
this site
that
had.
could affect people's health in a negative way, whereas a drive-through is not likely to do that.
Rats, lots of vermin, badly managed sites, noisy.
That's
That's not the drive-through, right?
That's sort of food.
Right.
Certain.
Right, they could have no
Yeah.
drive-through and have rats.
Right.
I mean, it can be noisy, it can be traffic, or. It
Could be dangerous.
Yeah, traffic danger, that type of thing. DOT.
Well, that's what DOT,
And
so that's the
what
thing.
DOT is looking into, and DOT has therefore required some of
Yeah.
those site elements, and
Right.
those would be incorporated into the plans.
I mean, I think, well, not really, not in the plans, because DOT says after 7 cars, you have to put a person out there. So that's not incorporated into anything that anyone's going to remember.
Except our conditions.
Well, the conditions, but I mean, in other words, how does that get enforced by coming back for a compliance hearing? I mean, if you think about all of the sort of those uses that were decided in the 40s that keep coming back here every 10 years, our opportunity is they're usually, very often, they're bad property managers. And so they come back and we have an opportunity to at least get them back into shape for a little while, right? So without having a term, you don't have that opportunity. Anyway, that's just to think about, and we can decide more. Okay.
Continued hearing items, item number 15, 22614BZ, 14702 76th Road in Queens.
Okay, sorry, a little lost here, what's going on? Okay. I know this sounds old, but I actually couldn't find the owner's authorization in the folder, so please make sure it's there. Otherwise, I don't know what we've been doing here. The statement of findings does not discuss religious deference. I understand that this is a little difficult if you're not used to making these kinds of applications. So what I recommend is that the applicant obtain a copy of a case where religious deference is actually discussed in the case law. And when I refer to case law, it's not BSA case law, it's the court cases that direct the BSA to defer in the A finding to religious houses of worship. And so likewise, programmatic needs is not a uniqueness finding. Programmatic needs is how you support the request for whatever the waivers are, but the A finding is actually the deference. That's why really the applicant needs to use a sample of another case that's correctly argued. We mentioned this at the last hearing. I saw the applicant took a stab at it, but did it without any other kind of guidance. So the revised statement of facts, though, is incorrect, as is the BSA zoning sheet, in that the statement of facts states the proposed floor area is as of right. The BSA zoning sheet states it's 593 square feet over, and the zoning chart on the plan states it's approximately 1,000 square feet over. So what's the answer? In fact, drawing P1 is also internally inconsistent, showing 2 different total floor areas, and the statement of facts is also internally inconsistent in that it states both that it is compliant and non-compliant in different locations. That's also true for the height. The plans say 35 feet, the statement of facts say 33'6". and clarify on the BSA chart and on the chart on the plan that 2 front yards are required and that 0 and 12-foot 6 is provided. Indicate on the same chart whether the proposed condition complies or needs a BSA variance. Indicate on both charts that 24-521 height and setback is penetrated and show the degree of penetration on the sections and elevations. The statement of fact also doesn't agree with the plans with respect to the total areas of multi-purpose rooms, but then the plans don't agree with the occupancy chart either, or with each other, actually, for that matter. The statement of fact should correct the reference to the rear yard. This is a corner lot, and there are 2 side yards. There are no rear yards. The chart and the statement of facts needs to agree about the applicable side yard regulations, and so I note it really isn't acceptable to submit materials to the board with that many mistakes. I mean, no mistakes is the destination, but that many mistakes is not acceptable. Actually, if I'd read this when it was first submitted, I would have just sent it back. I note that the parking calculation to show that an as-of-right waiver that applies to fewer than 10 cars is at 9.46, so that's 0.04 shy of not qualifying for the waiver. The findings of the CPC special permit, though, were addressed as we requested that they do, and a list of the congregants' addresses was provided. In future, please don't provide the congregants' addresses. We don't want to know how to mail them a letter. We just want to know that they live within the neighborhood. So it's just to show what blocks people live on. So 25 congregants live on this block. That's all we want to know. Yeah, we should take it from the record, yeah. We need a map showing the blocks, so, and in fact, their addresses is actually less helpful, because then we have to plot the addresses on a map. So then I'm getting really personal with the people if I'm sitting there plotting each address on the map. So we need a map showing the blocks on which they live and how many congregants live on these blocks, with a total for all located within walking distance. The congregant list includes the number of family members in each household, which is also scary because it's actually written on somebody's name and address, but I'd like to know what's the total number of congregants. You can actually indicate, there are this many families, and in those many families, there are these many people, and that way we get a sense of how many kids and all that stuff, because it's breaking up into who's using the building in what way. The graphic on the site plan I found wasn't working to show what the required yard depths are versus what's proposed. I actually couldn't figure it out. I just looked it up so that I could figure it out, but the graphic doesn't work. We also asked that the lesser variance option be revised to show a full cellar, as we see in the proposed, and that didn't happen. And also, I'd like to know, why doesn't the cellar extend to the full width of the lot in the proposed? It could go underneath, so you get a bigger subterranean space. And then they should provide a survey by a licensed surveyor, which we don't have, that shows the right-of-ways, meets and bounds, and refers to the recorded document by page and liber. Because just having the recorded document means I have to, or each of us has to try to figure out where it is and make sure it matches the drawings. And then with respect to the program, I'd like to know, why was another lecture room added in the cellar and the multipurpose room there reduced in size? Why was the multipurpose room on the first floor reduced in size from a capacity of 95 to 80? The men's room became larger for unknown reason. The kitchen also is larger. I can guess why it was done. It was to reduce the parking count. But then that goes against the programmatic needs.
Isn't the parking count based on the worship room, which is on the second floor?
It's based on whichever is the largest
whichever's
rated
the largest.
occupancy, right? So I'm not sure if that meant it was going to raise it to exceed the rated occupancy of the worship room. So, and also there's egress issues that it might have triggered, but I don't think so. Also, why was the synagogue at the second floor reduced in size from capacity? That's the one that has the highest rated capacity, from 183 to 142, without a change in the building's massing or significant layout changes. The women's toilet room actually got smaller there. So it seems that the walls were just sort of moved around to reduce the size so the rated occupancy would go down, so the parking count on the largest room would go down. The statement of facts describes this building as being used for many things, which I think are probably too many to fit on this small site. It's a synagogue, a nursery school, a Sunday school, a summer school, a rabbinical college, a rabbinical court, and training programs. The schedule provided needs more information, and we asked for this at the last hearing. How many people in each room at each time of the day for each purpose, shown on a chart in a form with hours in one column and rooms going across, and a chart for each day if the day is different. So Monday to Thursday, and then one each for Friday, and one each for Saturday, and one for Sunday. One chart should also be provided for the 2 months of summer school and how they manage that in light of the other facilities, other activities that go on in the building at the same time. For instance, is everything going on in summer? Is there a recess, for instance, on the rabbinical court? And I actually do think the rabbinical court probably doesn't belong in this building. We don't normally see such a thing commonly associated with a synagogue, especially if it requires a whole separate floor in order to accomplish that. The rendering, though very helpful, does not show the currently proposed project with the corner of the building at the third floor removed. The elevator overrun is shown at 17 feet high on the rendering, but it's actually 8 feet high on the elevations, which sounds more accurate. The rendering also shows a very long bulkhead where the elevator is, even though the stair doesn't go to the roof on that side. The architect is proposing Dryvit as the finish material. That is not acceptable in a BSA case. It's a very, very bad, cheap material that doesn't last and needs to be replaced with something else. There are other materials like cement board and things like that that are decorative and last better.
I would add to it that given the very uniform building typology that's there and the material that has been used, whatever the architect proposes has to be very much in keeping with the character of the neighborhood, which is mostly brick kind of finish. The building that is across the street, which is also a rabbinical school, went extensively through a design that used material that was very similar to the material that is found in the neighborhood. And since this is it's part of an attached block.
Attached row, yeah.
Attached row. It is very important that that material is consistent and in keeping with that context.
Okay, so brick is the way. And the trim can't be Dryvit either. I've seen, what is it, styrofoam cornices. They are, it's just basically like building a cheesecake. And in terms of height and bulk, just in terms of the argument, comparison to the other religious buildings shown on the chart, I thought was quite telling. All of those sites are much larger than the subject, and the two smaller sites have buildings that are only 2 stories, and this is 3. And everything sits, all these other ones sit in the middle of the site and have land around them, and so when you have a large building with land around it, it's a different relationship to the neighborhood, to the character, so careful what you compare yourself to.
Well, I agree with you about the third floor and the third floor being occupied by the rabbinical court. My question is this rabbinical court the rabbinical court of Queens, which I thought I saw on the paperwork? Is it actually under the auspices of this synagogue? Because if not, I don't understand why programmatically it has to be located at this space. And if it's for all of Queens, it probably should be located somewhere else. if it's specific just to this synagogue, I also don't understand then why for 146 families, this is a use that's basically all day and all night, because that's how it's described, as constantly talking about divorces and marriages and matchmaking and bills and all sorts of different things that they have to go through. It just doesn't seem like there would be enough work when there are only 142 families. So
Otherwise, it's a contentious group of people.
yeah. So I really don't, I'm not convinced that that rabbinical court has to be located on this site. And then if it's not located on this site, then I'm not sure that this synagogue needs yet another multi-purpose room. There just aren't enough families to need all of this space and all of these multi-purpose rooms. It's almost like that becomes the primary use of this, because you've got one floor devoted to worship and you've got like 3 floors of multi-purpose rooms.
Right.
So that's my biggest issue.
And all that because it's too large on the lot. And so how do you get it, and it's attached, like you said, to all those little row houses. So how do you bring it more in line with what those are? And still, it's a community building, but it can't be towering over and kind of aggressively attached to the other.
I think both of you have raised my concerns. I'm not satisfied with the argument that the applicant has raised that the lesser variance is not feasible. More explanation needs to be given. No effort has been made to treat the cellar floor in the similar way that's been done for the proposed, and look at ways of allowing for more use in the lower floors and reduce the bulk on the upper floors. I'm learning as I'm going about the operation of the rabbinical court, and I also question the purpose of it and how it serves, and the multi-programming of the space. And it seems like there's not a single minute that has been set aside between one program to the other, which almost seems unrealistic and not feasible to make a space operate like that, where within 15 minutes the space changes into a classroom, and then after that 9 to 7 there's a continuation of the rabbinical court, which is actually all the way from morning till evening when there are schools going on, classrooms going on in between. So to me, the programmatic argument for those spaces have not been clearly justified, and I agree that that floor has not been clearly identified to me and could be eliminated.
Thank you.
Ready? Item number 16, 105-15BZ, 2102, 2124 Avenue Z, Brooklyn.
Okay. We have a new letter of objection from Assemblymember Helene Weinstein, objecting to the proposed use, massing, and parking waiver. Although the letter is dated August 11th, I'm not sure that the Assembly member has seen the latest proposal that has significantly reduced the extent of the waivers on this tight triangular site. For the benefit of the Assembly member, I want to reiterate that this is a variance application where no as-of-right development could be constructed due to setback requirements. So an outright denial, which is being recommended by the Assembly member, would in fact deprive the property owner of its beneficial use of its property. To date, the property has been a nuisance in the neighborhood, and the proposed use is very much consistent with the commercial uses 1 block away on Z and Ocean, and ground floor retail uses on Z. Further, nearly all of the uses on the island block between Z and Jerome from East 22nd to its completion on East 14th are either commercial or institutional, demonstrating that the island really is not ideal for residential use. I'm going to defer to Commissioner Otley Brown with respect to the viability of the residential above the retail lesser variance version, which is what the Assembly member suggested this be, that it be retail on the ground floor and residential above. But I want to note that the 2-story entirely residential version that was provided with the initial application materials and that requires front yard setback, lot coverage, open space, parking, and density waivers, assumed marketability of 13 units in the 1,000 to 1,200 square foot range. And so I'd ask Commissioner Otley Brown also to comment, and then the applicant to comment, would that project, so the two-story residential surmounted on one level of retail, grade level retail, make a reasonable return? And also, this site may have contamination levels that may affect a residential building differently, even if there's a commercial use in between. I'm not sure about that. I don't know if it changes the cleanup. That requires a lot more work. Also, at the March 21 hearing, the owner represented that it would have site control by mid-April and would remove vehicles and trash from the site and discontinue used car sales, which were not permitted by the BSA. I'd like to know whether that's happened, because the neighbors have been very upset about how the site has been managed. I note that photos were provided showing that on July 26th, there was no parking on the sidewalk, which is always prohibited. On May 26th, though, and just prior to the June 20th hearing, our commissioners inspected the site and found cars on the sidewalk. So were those cars eliminated on July 26th for the photo, and now they're back? With respect to the submitted plans, the as-of-right plans, Plan B, continue to show a four-story building that is not as-of-right. We talked about this the last time, so there isn't actually an as-of-right proposal. The good reason for that is there isn't anything you can build here as-of-right. It would be this tiny, skinny little triangle. And so, but I'm not really sure what the purpose of that set of plans is, because it calls itself as-of-right, and it just isn't. The plans also need to be clarified to indicate that elevations are in NAVD 88 and a firm map should be provided. The resubmission of the same sets of plans is very confusing. So all those plans were just resubmitted. There were no changes made to them. The design flood elevation wasn't corrected. There was no dry flood proofing shown on those plans for the space below the design flood. And as discussed at the last hearing, the first level is a basement, not a cellar, so counts as floor area, and design flood is 11, not 12. On the other hand, there's a new Plan D that was provided, which responded to all those kinds of comments. It provides 6 on-site parking spaces, which is something that we discussed at the last hearing, does show design flood at 11 with dry flood proofing, and the first level is shown as a basement, including it in total floor area. So it's only 1 foot below design flood. So it counts as a basement, and it essentially sits at grade, though. So they're no longer excavating a cellar. So because it was so correctly done, I'm reading that as the new proposal, which I think is very reasonable. The 6-space parking area, which has room for a couple of more cars for staff and patient parking, with a little juggling, would go a long way in alleviating the parking concerns about the project, which peak demand has shown to be 15 cars, so it would reduce that demand on the street, which is significant because, for instance, the parking garages are really far away that are being used in the parking study. And for me, that also mitigates against the additional waiver for floor area being requested for providing parking. Then I don't have as much of an issue with the floor area increase. And furthermore, once you approach the project this way, no excavation for a cellar is required, which reduces construction and remediation costs and improves access to the value of the retail, which was another issue because you had to go down to the retail. Who wants to rent subterranean retail? Nobody.
And then you're losing space because of all the ramping.
Right.
Now you gain that space back, and it's at grade.
Right, right.
And
Yeah.
I read the plans that they had a 2-story as their proposed, and that the one with the parking and the 3 was a scenario that.
It is.
But I just.
But they didn't
But they didn't correct that. I mean, I think it's great that you like that I personally,
Yeah,
I it's my opinion, but I read that they had a proposal that was actually different than that. So-
They labeled the proposed,
Yeah.
the same one that we looked at before.
Right.
But it's not, it's a little hard to believe it because they made no corrections to that drawing. They didn't say, okay, we'll treat that as a basement, which it is, even though it's subterranean. We'll change the design flood elevation, we'll make the various corrections to show that this is our proposal. Instead, they submitted all the same drawings, and the only one that looks believable now is the one they call Plan D, which is another version of the lesser variance.
Right, I think the only thing they did to those proposed plans was show us the deductions that they were going to take on the
Yeah.
income.
Right.
Right, they used
The
it as a way to
combination.
show-
Right, and that's about the only thing.
Right.
Right. And so, yeah, so, and if you want to talk about that, I was going to talk about the parking study after, so if you want to talk about the financials and then we
Sure,
can come back.
and then go back to you.
Yeah.
Sure. So, in order to address the Assemblywoman's concerns, what we would need to see is, and it doesn't have to be a full-blown financial analysis, but what we would like to see is a letter that recalculates the income and the expenses based on using the Plan D's ground floor retail plus 6 parking spaces, and then the 2 floors of the residential apartments on top of it, and to give us a scenario that basically takes the construction costs from both of those different scenarios, but for those little parts, puts that together, and then assigns income based on the income assumptions that they had previously, taking into account some of the minor adjustments I'm going to suggest, and then show us whether or not that would work, and that would actually address the assembly person's questions and show that we're being responsive to them. I think that would be a good idea. And now talking about the financials that we were given and the new scenario, and as well as the proposed scenario that they gave us. Number one, when they gave us that Plan D, I thought the whole idea behind the Plan D was that we were going to look at a scenario that would somehow reduce the construction costs and do that by raising the building out of the ground and also bringing it closer to design flood, so there would be less of an expense due to the dry or wet flood proofing. And so I fully expected that the construction costs were going to go lower, but they didn't. They actually, the hard construction costs are higher than the proposed, and I'm really not sure why. So I think that we need some kind of a narrative that explains what happened with the construction costs, because all of the different scenarios kind of changed, there's no way to go back to a baseline and figure out what was going on. So I think we really need some assistance there. Now, as for the major question that I had, which was talking about the net rentable space versus gross space, my original argument was that too much of the gross floor plate was being taken out of the analysis and called common area and not assigned income, and that was what was driving the project. In response to that, the financial analyst did add back some space and assigned an income to it. However, I went on the internet and I did a lot of reading, and I read about the revenue standards for pricing out commercial floor plates, as well as the BOMA standards for pricing out commercial floor plates. And what I found was the revenue standards are actually applicable within the 5 boroughs, and the BOMA standards are everywhere else in the United States. And what the revenue standards basically say is that the rentable space should be measured to the outside of the exterior wall, and then the common area space should be deducted. But then one should apply a loss factor of 27% of the gross floor plate and add that income back in, which is why in New York City, in most cases for office buildings, people are actually paying to rent space that's larger than the building. So if we take that as the standard applied within New York City, then at the very least, there should be no space taken out of these analyses. And what they should be using is the entire floor plate and assigning income to the entire floor plate. So right now, they're deducting about 900 square feet per floor. that should actually be added in. Now, given that, then the proposed scenario, of course, would show a greater return that is currently showing, and Plan D, actually, between the added income and also the adjustment of the cap rate, which is an assumption of the overall return, should actually prove feasible. So that's what I would like to see, because I do agree with the chair that some parking is really essential at this site. It's just a very difficult area to find parking.
Do you want to chime in?
No, I think that both of you have raised my comments. I do think the Plan D is a reasonable option. I had similar question on the financing as to why the cost of construction was still high for Plan D, given that everything is at grade level, and with lesser amount of wall space, because part of it is going to be parking. So I think an explanation would be helpful in clarifying that. I agree, this is a property with 4 street frontages, so you have to pick a frontage. And based on the predominant use of these triangular sections, these uses have been anything but residential use. So I do think this is a much more viable, reasonable use, and it's compatible with the surrounding context. And I do have, I think Chair, you and I have discussed in terms of the building design of it. It could be more articulated to make each one of those appear and read as separate buildings by further enhancing the verticalities and bringing it all the way to the ground level and making them appear that they are separate buildings and not one large massive structure, which in the last iteration the architect did work towards that, but I think it can be further improved, and by providing that additional few parking spaces, it will alleviate the parking need. Although I have to say, I've been to the site twice and I was able to find parking, so that was just my experience, but it may have been a light day. So I think that providing that parking on the site would address the parking demand, and it would be better
Would
used.
reduce, would respond in part, because it's not
would respond,
meeting
yeah.
full demand.
Yes.
Right, okay. And then, just to pick up on that, because it's a later comment about the facade again, this is it exterior facade insulation system, otherwise known as EFIS or IFIS, same thing as Drive It, only just a different brand. Not okay for a building subject to a variance. Look at other materials that are fitting within your financial concerns but are durable and attractive. This should be considered an asset to the community, not a blight. Then in terms of the parking study, that was revised based on the 3-story scaled down project, using a new data source, and indicates a peak demand of 15 spaces from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. with on-street parking supply of 74 to 52 during those hours. There is a slight error in the parking calcs with respect to the floor area for each use, and that should be corrected. It wasn't, let's say, the calculations are right, but the number is wrong, so. And the hint is that the zoning lot is 7,964 square feet, so that should be the number that you see for the parking calcs. The Domino FEIS was used as the basis for the medical office study, and the secret technical manual for the office study, and then East New York FEIS for the retail study, without explanation given to establish the similarity between this site and Domino or East New York. I do note, however, that the seeker technical manual, Domino and East New York all use 205 trips per 1,000 gross in retail and 18 trips per 1,000 for office. But as a check, the DOT's 127 per 1,000 gross square feet for medical offices should also be tested, or an explanation given for why Domino is the appropriate source here, because it's a completely different neighborhood with different kinds of access to public transportation. Also, Exhibit E and F of the parking study for distance to bus stops and parking lots show the wrong site. Sites across the street. This was commented on at the last hearing. Also, the distances, which we commented on at the last hearing, are as the crow flies, which if you could fly, you wouldn't need to park. And the parking lots are pretty far away. We also made all those comments at the last hearing. With respect to the building massing and frontage, I think they're much improved in the Plan D. And then I made a comment about the material, not okay for it to be IFAS. And I agree with Commissioner Shanda about the articulation should be clearer in terms of breaking up the building into smaller parts, apparently smaller parts, to resemble more of the character of the neighborhood.
Especially along Avenue Z, that the front of the building fronting Avenue Z, that's the treatment that is what I was kind of thinking, had in my mind.
And then also, nothing worse than pretending it's a column and then it sits above a storefront window. So that's glass holding up a column. It's a no-no in the architecture world. Don't do it. And at the March hearing, the applicant stated that a Phase 2 testing would begin within the next few weeks. I don't like to know what the status, they haven't started it yet?
As far as I was told.
Okay, so we need those test results reviewed by DEP or put an E designation on this or something, but we can't decide on this until we can issue a negative declaration. And Commissioner Montanez, by the way, was clear, and I agree with her, that any contamination from recent uses can't be considered in the cost analysis, because there was actually a cleanup operation here with respect to the garage, the gas station use. We also have open LP landmarks and waterfront analysis that needs to be addressed, and the EAS has to be amended to reflect the revised project, which I'm reading as the Plan D, along with the final version of the parking study. And that's that. Anything else?
I don't know.
Sorry.
Okay,
Go on.
yeah.
Item number 17, 17815 BZ, 99-47 Davenport Court, Queens.
Okay. They provided a map to support the unique lot size argument. The study states that 12 lots may be 70 feet deep or less, but that should actually be 18 lots, including vacant lot 95, that has this little sliver attached to it, plus 6 vacant lots, numbers 1001 to 4, 1101 to 6. In addition, 6 lots are 71 to 72 feet deep, 2 of which are vacant, so that's 17 vacant lots with similar dimensions, many of which are not as wide as this 50-foot wide lot. So I'm still not there on the A finding, which is pretty basic. That's the first half of the A finding, right? Or no, actually, that's the A finding. And then I find this a rather confusing and non-responsive submission in general. A diagram was provided showing the previous pre-construction conditions, which were a 1-story house with a non-complying 2-foot side yard and an 8-foot rear yard. The second diagram shows one version of an as-of-right enlargement on top of that house, which holds back 5 feet from the side yard, which is required, but has this inexplicably shaped second floor that holds back further from the required approximately 28-foot rear yard than is necessary, and you get to be 28 feet because it's a pre-61 lot, so you get to take off 1 foot for every foot less than 70 feet. However, that inexplicable shape is actually the shape of the illegally constructed addition, so that's why they use that. But a proper as-of-right drawing would have shown what could have been built absent the existing structure, and from there we would determine whether relief in the interest of establishing the A finding would be warranted. As it is, the conforming plan submitted for the last hearing show what appears to be a very viable one at the two-family home. The statement of fact states that the project will comply with Appendix G without demonstrating that it does. It must demonstrate that it does. A copy of the Borough President's map for the area was provided, showing the closure of 163rd Avenue, hence eliminating the widening line. So that eliminates the GCL waiver discussion. At the last hearing, we asked some very specific questions that were not addressed. That's partly why the submission is so unresponsive. They were not addressed. They were, if, as is indicated from Google Earth images dated 2007, the house was already completed without permits. Could it have been rebuilt under section 64-A12, A20, and A30 of the zoning resolution? Or if under 64-A12, A20, and A30, the existing pre-2007 house could have been raised, could it have been raised in place? And under section 54-313B of the zoning resolution, could the pre-2007 house been vertically enlarged? So those two questions have to do with, had you applied for permits for this thing, would you have gotten permits? Because, and the first question is, under the sort of reconstruction provisions after Sandy, the city was allowing non-complying buildings, even if they didn't have permits, to just be reconstructed, because all you had to do was show that they were there prior to Sandy. And then we asked, does the house at present comply with Appendix G and the neighborhood recovery area regs? And also, that we asked to identify the owner of the way that's located behind the house to ascertain whether this is a through lot or an interior lot, that they should go through the definition of street in the zoning resolution, section 1210, and explain why the applicant believes this is not a street. They also need to respond to the question, was the lot larger as shown on the Sanborn maps that date to as recently as 1991? These suggest that the subject owner is actually the owner of the way. Hence, the zoning lot would be deeper, measuring the rear yard line further back and making available more floor area, and an easement should exist to permit the pedestrian crossing. But that would actually eliminate a lot of the waivers and actually even potentially render this house mostly compliant, because it wouldn't be built in its required rear yard. It wouldn't need more floor area for a waiver. They should also provide copies of the 2007 self-certified plans, which we asked for. We asked for all that stuff at the last hearing. And this is always whenever I get to this point where it's taking me hours to figure this stuff out, I really believe that the applicant is asking the board to do the work for him instead of actually doing the work, and it's not okay. It's your argument to make. It's not ours to figure out how you should get this. And it'd be one thing if it was an inexperienced applicant, but it's not. Others?
Again, the plans that were submitted, the statement states that the as-of-right vertical enlargement would have resulted in an awkward building that would be impractical, infeasible due to split stories and limited use of the eastern portion of the site. Doesn't make sense. I mean, what has been built is also on the second floor. It's to me, the argument just, I don't even want to speculate, but to me, it did not make sense. And they need to clarify in the statement as to why an as-of-right would not be feasible and an expansion could not have worked. To me, it seems it's very much doable. And also, I would like to see if there are two-family homes in the neighborhood. It would be helpful to provide that map. I don't think there are. Most of these are single-family homes. I would like to know that. It does say that the subject building will comply with flood regulations. I'm not sure how it will, That's not been clearly stated in the documents, and especially post-construction, how does one make a building compliant? We need a lot more clarification on that, and I agree with all the questions. There are a lot of outstanding documents that we need to further understand.
I'm not convinced that without choosing the way in which they went about putting on that second floor, I agree with Commissioner Shanda that I'm not sure that that really is an awkward floor plate. So they need to give us more information. Is it awkward regarding the interior staircase, or they need to?
It's the same, but it's the same entryway that is being proposed for the as of right. So if you look at the as of right plan versus what's built, the entryway is the same. The location of the kitchen is the same, so I'm not sure.
I would like them to address
Yeah.
why they feel it's awkward, because I am in agreement with you that I don't see awkwardness.
I know.
That's basically what I was talking about.
It just doesn't go with their argument.
Yeah, and also adding on and asking a question based on what the chair stated about them incorporating the walkway into their lot, which would give them less non-compliances. I think that would be problematic, because then the lot depth would be much larger and they would have no uniqueness finding.
Right.
So I think that's a problem. It's kind of like, catch-22 sort of situation.
Yeah, right, that's true, then they don't have to worry about the rear yard depth.
Right, and they
Right.
would have no uniqueness.
But if they don't have a floor area problem, and they don't have a rear yard problem, then there's other avenues for relief for elevated properties.
Yes.
Right, so it may be that they're not eligible, they could not be eligible for variance, and then have other ways to
that's true.
address some of those
Right.
problems, right?
Okay.
With the compensation, perhaps.
Yeah.
Ready?
Right, no, one second. Sandyville. Okay. Good.
Go. Item number 18, 2016-4181BZ, 1981 East 14th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, we had a threshold question on this one about whether sufficient existing material was being retained to constitute an enlargement of an existing building. Drawings now show the rear wall and most of the north side wall being retained. The front and south side walls are proposed to be removed, and the house extended into one side yard and the front yard. However, none of the second floor walls are being retained, and the hatching misrepresents this since it shows the floor plate of the floor below, which does not extend to the second floor. It's just looking down at the floor below. I actually don't understand why they think that should be counted. Right, and unless it's about the joists and it's not about the walls. Likewise, it doesn't look like any of the existing attic level is being retained, so this is far less than 50% of the existing material being retained. That's walls and joists. A rendering was provided, although I think it isn't quite in scale, since the one that's taken from a distance appears to show the house receding behind the front wall line of the neighbor, while the close-up shows it extending well in front of the neighbor, as is consistent with the plans. However, the height seems to be consistent with the existing house, and the massing of that side seems to comport with neighborhood character. So I'm just not, renderings, that's why they're renderings. Sometimes you get to a little poetic license, but they're certainly better than the 2D streetscapes where that's not poetic license. Poetry doesn't fit into that kind of analysis. No further support was provided to justify the depth of the second floor with a 23-foot rear yard. Immediate neighbors have complying rear yards, and the church to the rear with the 5-foot rear yard is offset relative to this house, plus the second floor actually has room to set back. And the architect really has to attend this. Any other comments? Okay.
You want the architect here?
Yeah, always.
Item number 19, 2016-4224BZ, 1869 East 21st Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, similar to the project we just looked at, we had threshold issues with this one relative to removal of too much existing material. Plans were submitted on Friday in an attempt to clarify the intention. They show, and by the way, submitting plans on Friday before a hearing is not acceptable. I'm not sure that we should really not be accepting them.
They submitted it because I called them and asked them for more information.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. They show, they show, the plans show the front wall, a 6-foot section of the south side wall, and the entire north wall, side wall retained at the first floor. So on that floor, we have 55% retention of the first floor. On the second floor, however, the only retained wall is the 38-foot long north side wall, which is only 35% of the perimeter. The main reason for this is that the front wall at that level is being extended forward by 4 feet. Both floors show the joist to be retained, although in addition, the second floor joist will be raised. Since foundation walls don't count towards floor area, they can't be included in the perimeter calculations, and so we have less than 50% of the total material being retained, and so it's not yet an enlargement of an existing building. With respect to the rear yard, the applicant provided a copy of BSA-approved plans for 1810 East 22nd Street, located to the rear of the subject site that shows a 20-foot rear yard, but none of the adjacent homes on any side of the subject or at 1810 have such reduced rear yards, although all have one-story garages in the yards. At the same time, the height of the building is 31 feet and seems very much in line with adjacent homes. The rendering supports that view. The attic is not shown as being habitable, but no floor-to-ceiling height is provided. The stair is not shown ascending to it, so it won't be habitable, unlike some of the other ones we see where there's like a future stair, an elevator, and a future stair. In any event, and consistent with our other applications, more existing material needs to be maintained for the special permit, so I think that little front wall needs to pull back. Anybody else?
No.
Okay.
Item number 20, 2016-4464BZ, 1350 East 28th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, the plans were not revised for this submission. We had discussed at the last hearing at length that we can't look at this house in isolation and need plans that show both of the semi-detached houses along with their sections and elevations.
The elevations are in the original submission?
Yeah, right, those are there, but in other words, it can't just be the elevations. We really need to understand how the roof plan works. You can't understand a house just from an elevation, especially from an elevation where it flattens everything. So you don't really get a sense of how it works unless you see the roof plans, you know, and the rear, the side, and all that. A nice rendering, though, from the street was provided. It points out for me that the peak of the addition should align with the peak of the existing structure, as it's really unresolved. There's kind of this wall that appears above the peak of the neighbor. Either that, or it has to pick up from the slope of the existing roof, that you could kind of, you could continue the slope of the existing roof and rise to it, and then maybe that's a way of solving it. And that would incorporate it into the mass of the roof line. The rendering doesn't really match with the elevation that was provided in March, where the roof peak appears to be much higher. The submission discusses why the distance between buildings regulation should not apply to the subject property. This is in an R2 where only single-family detached residences are permitted. The subject is a semi-detached residence, hence is a non-conforming use in the district. So the issue is whether the side yard of a non-conforming structure can be further reduced under 73-622. Section 23-461A doesn't apply to semi-detached buildings. 23-461B does. B requires in R3 districts, which this isn't, an 8-foot side yard. In R4 districts, a 4-foot side yard is required, but the building is also subject to paragraph C, which, among other things, requires either 8 feet or 13 feet between buildings on certain adjacent lots, and that has to be figured out. Like, we can't tell you which one it is without knowing more about the adjacent properties. The applicant needs to have gone through the tests in C to determine whether those provisions apply. The survey shows there's a 4-foot side yard on one side of the adjoining zoning lot, and the existing subject side yard is 8'9". If, on the other hand, so these are really DOB's calls about how to handle something like this. If, on the other hand, 23-461A applies to this non-conforming building, the remaining side yard certainly can't be reduced at all since it's required to total 13 feet, and there's only one yard that's 8'9". So, you know, one way maybe you could reduce it, and the other way I don't see how you could reduce it, and who decides which is the right way seems to me to be DOB, because I'm not sure how you handle a non-conforming building and then what rules apply. It's probably more likely the rules that apply in the zoning district, in which case you can't reduce it. Also, photos of the rear yards were provided, but I didn't find them helpful in figuring out what the dimensions of adjoining yards are. Google Earth shows the adjacent house built deeper than the existing subject, but doesn't show how deep, obviously, it doesn't measure it. It also shows some one-story extensions. And in any event, the proposal is for a one-story extension to a 20-foot rear yard, and then it pulls back at the second floor to what I think is a reasonable 26'3" rear yard. So I think that's okay, except that we really need to see it in the context of the attached house. So this, for me, is really about the fact that they're attached houses and what does it do to them, does to the other one. Other comments on this?
No.
Okay.
New cases, item number 11614 BZ, 188 East 93rd Street, Manhattan.
Okay, we have a proof of, not because it's a new hearing, we have a proof of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors, but I didn't find proof of the initial submission, although we have a community board recommendation. This is a legalization. Community board voted unanimously to recommend denial of the application, which is quite unusual for a gym. We have 2 letters in support and 2 very strong letters in opposition. A tenant who lives right above the spin studio states that the use has been in operation since April of 2013, while the statement of fact states actually it even opened earlier in December of 2012. The tenant also says that there were over 100 noise and vibration complaints and a big electric sign installed without permits, which I actually didn't find, so I don't know what they mean. And he says, the tenant says it operates from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. I note that with respect to the tenant's complaints, that the original legalization application was filed in May 2014. A notice of comments was sent out in June 2014, so very quick response. And no response was provided by the applicant for more than 1 year, and the follow-up submissions took more than a year to follow after that. So to me, that reads like a clear intent to avoid legalization by the applicant, or to address the tenant's complaints.
They were addressing the tenant's complaints because I spoke to the applicant regarding this matter about the noise matters, because at the same time we were dealing with the other project, CrossFit. And they noticed the board's concerns about that operator's issues, And the applicant contacted me, and I said, you should look at addressing the tenants' issues.
Okay, but
So
it
they're
took them,
trying to work and try and resolve this.
but they applied in 2014 and we're in 2017, so it took them a long time to.
And DOI, there was a DOI trying to get through.
Right, but, you know, so that's a really long time in responding to legalize and then come before us.
And I also, they also submitted a response. I asked them to respond to the neighbors' concerns, and they submitted a response today, which I forwarded to you. I have a copy, but there's one page missing.
Okay, well, we'll look at it after.
Okay.
And also, I note the statement of facts hasn't been revised since 2015, so that puts in perspective how long it's just kind of sat around with them, I read, as intentionally not prosecuting this, because why would you if maybe it gets shut down because it's a nuisance? So I don't see any indication of an electric sign, as I mentioned, but the signage calculations and drawings appear to comply with the zoning resolution, but that's really DOB's call about what they consider to be the confines of the sign, because it's a big,
Cycle wheel.
yeah, it's a big wheel, and there's a lot of color and what they consider to be the
It's
sign,
like a
but,
separate structure that's been placed in front of the building wall.
right, yeah,
It's almost-
panel.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Just to conceal so you don't look inside, like a lot of the gyms don't like people looking
That's a
inside.
very new approach to signage, right?
Again, where
That's a
signage
DOB.
signage isn't before us, we'll have a comment that the signage is not reviewed by us, we don't waive it. We do have DOI, but fire department didn't sign off, and this is a legalization. The floor plan showed the PCE spans between 1558 and 1560 Third Avenue with a side entrance on 93rd Street. So actually, it's not being properly referred to in the application materials. It's actually in two buildings. The exact hours of operation don't really agree. The statement of facts and the tenant statements don't agree. I went on the website that indicates classes run until 8:30 PM, so conceptually, the patrons are out by 9. So this is a spin studio, and we know from a lot of experience that these studios must be built in boxes within boxes to isolate noise and vibration. This building typology, which is two tenement buildings, is even more susceptible to vibration and sound transmission than would a building that's built for a commercial purpose or for new residential construction. So I really can imagine the whole building's moving as everyone reaches common velocity, like what we learn in school, takes down bridges. So I do understand, though, that that the second floor tenant, who's probably the person that's making the complaints here, has not allowed access to conduct testing. But I also note that only noise and not vibration testing was done. And that was done in the second floor hallway and not in the other tenant's unit. There's another unit adjacent. And so the test reports are also from 2014 and 15. So I would like to know what the tenants in the building think of the situation today. The noise tests actually showed exceedance over noise code by up to 12 decibels, so I kind of didn't even understand the noise analysis, because it shows noise code and then what it's like today above that line. So, and they're saying it's lower or equal to ambient levels, but they didn't show us what the ambient levels were. There was no ambient test done. And then I'm trying to understand where the hallway is that they tested relative to the spin studio below. They didn't show us that. I'm assuming that the tenant who's complaining is right on top of the spin studio. So if the hallway is a little bit to the left over reception, that doesn't necessarily go to it. But we do have a letter from the general contractor describing the sound attenuation measures that were installed. That information is described on the drawings, but should be shown on the plans and details provided. We also have a fire department fire alarm inspection request from February and photos showing fire alarm and equipment installed. I'd like to understand the status of the inspection. It should have taken place already. And what about sprinkler installation? they need to provide proof of that installation and inspection. Other more comments?
I mean, I agree with you that they didn't address the vibration, and to me, the vibration is more troubling, because that's really something that's very hard to function when there's constantly movement. Yep.
And, you know, it's funny because coming up, we have another spin studio that's a much more sophisticated company, obviously, and the details, the vibration details on it are major. I mean, that is an expensive installation they put in there. Okay.
Item number, I'm sorry, go on.
Go ahead.
Item number 2, 2017-14BZ, 230 West 27th Street, Manhattan.
Okay, okay, so this is a new application. We have proof of service of the initial application to officials and proof of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board 5 recommended approval. There's a confusing statement in the statement of facts that the proposed enlargement for the bookstore in the residence hall will, quote, not increase the degree of legal nonconformity. I thought this is a request to increase floor area in a building that is currently non-complying, so I'm not understanding what that statement's about. Maybe it should just go. Might be left over from another application, I don't know. With respect to the initial plaza bonus, so this is I can't help myself when I look at these applications, like how to do this without requiring a BSA application. So there's an initial plaza bonus that permitted 97,288 square foot building, but only 95,653 square feet was ever constructed. So I'm curious whether, having been built prior to the text change, and having vested the total bonus, the 1974 plaza wouldn't still entitle the build-out to 97,000 square feet. Seems like it should. They vested, so then they wouldn't need us. So also, I just wanted to know what the proposed use of the bookstore extension's roof is. It says in the statement of facts it won't be accessible to students. Is it just asphalt or bitumen? And just curious, because it's a school, what about doing some kind of green roof on the top? Or is it going to be for mechanical, or what? And then they should provide elevations of the extension, including the proposed materials. They didn't show anything about how it's going to look to the neighbors, to the people who are in the courtyard, et cetera, or in the rear yard. Anybody else on this one?
I just would like a little bit more of the neighborhood uses in the rear, other than that.
Adjoining properties.
Adjoining properties, just to kind of get a sense of where this is, granted that this is permitted as of right, and one could have a community facility use all the way to the rear. I just would like a little bit of a description on it, otherwise I have no issues.
Okay. Anything else?
I do have the question on the floor area.
Okay. Same issue about the plaza bonus.
Yeah.
That would be embarrassing. Okay. Okay.
Item number 3, 2017-37BZ, 142 West 23rd Street, Manhattan.
Okay, this is also a legalization of a gym that opened in January. We do have proof of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors and proof of service of the initial application to officials. Community Board 4 recommended approval. We have 1 letter in support. Fire Department has signed off on this and acknowledges that this is a legalization. And the applicant provided photos of the alarm and sprinklers installed. And we also have DOI. And so actually, I had only one question, which was how does this disabled access work if you come in from the street and check in? How do you check in, basically, if you have to enter through the main lobby? So, yeah, there isn't any direct connection from the lobby to the elevator to the next level. So how would you check
Seems
in?
like the same elevator that is being used by the residents will be used by the occupant to go downstairs. So
Yes.
that's kind of what it's leading to.
Yes.
Okay.
So we see that kind of somewhat often. That's up to the residential, it's not the main entrance, but at least it's, because this is a very small studio, it's not like one of the very large gyms where they really need to provide their own elevator. Also, just this is a note again to our council, when putting together the application for sending out to DOB, there's attenuation drawings that were provided that are part of their architectural set. That should be attached to the BSA set that would go out, because the attenuation drawings have to run with floor plan. Okay? Anybody else?
Item number 4, 2017-40BZ, 420 Park Avenue South.
Okay, this is also legalization, opened in September. We do have proof of service of initial application to officials, but I didn't find the notice of hearing in the file. Community Board 5 waived their right to hear this. They need to include the sound attenuation drawings with the BSA record plans. There are sound attenuation drawings, so again, that's note to our council to make sure that's included in there. And this is the example that I was referring to of the special attenuation box within a box floating floor for a spin studio, which is a very impressive set of details for how you handle people on bicycles inside. We do need fire department sign off for the legalization, and they need to provide proof of fire alarm and sprinkler installation and fire department inspection. We do have, though, photos of fire alarm and sprinklers installed, and we still need DOI. So we're missing a bunch of stuff, but otherwise.
I had a couple of questions.
Okay.
The signage, at least as shown, seems to, visually just to me, it seems it exceeds the maximum permitted. So it would be helpful if it can be clarified. And I'm assuming the sign includes not just the sign that's above the doorway, but that's what's engraved into the door, and those 2 additional vertical signs on 2 sides of the door, and the banner on at the entrance. So adding all of that, it seems it exceeds, but I would like a clarification on that.
So they need to provide calculation.
Yes. Calculation only included the signage that's above the doorway, but it
Okay.
didn't- and the banners.
Okay. They have to provide calculations or explain why those wouldn't be included.
Why those wouldn't,
Right.
exactly.
Right, okay.
Okay. Item number 5, 2017-50BZ, 458 Fifth Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, this one is under construction. I even watched their video to see what in the world Beast Fitness could be evolved. We have proof of service of the initial application to officials and also notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. We do need a community board recommendation. Fire department sent a letter of objection and requires a fire alarm be installed, and so the notes on the plans need to be revised to conform to the BSA standards for fire alarms. The plans indicate a sprinkler system is or will be installed, so if it has been installed, they need to provide proof of installation and inspection. If it's part of the build-out, because I understand the building's it's a gut renovation of an existing building, so we have DOI. The statement of fact description of acoustical separation doesn't match what's shown on the detail drawings. The details are fairly standard partitions with insulation and sheetrock on 2 sides. They're not as described in the statement of facts, 3 layers on one side and 2 layers on the other side. So the details have to be corrected to match at the very least that detail. This is a residential building, and that would be the minimum necessary. An insulated hung ceiling was shown on the drawings, although it's not a spring-hung ceiling, which we see most of the time for these gyms. It's actually a fairly standard insulated hung ceiling. But that also needs to be shown, described in the statement of facts. Yeah. I mean, normally acoustical consultants recommend those spring-hung ceilings for these kinds of uses. Okay, anybody else?
I'm sorry, I did have a question. I believe there were 4 ECB violations. It wasn't clear whether they were related to the PC or not. So it just would be clarified.
Well, the PCE hasn't opened, so.
No, it has not, but
Yeah, they're construction related. Yeah.
Okay.
Item number 6, 2017-236BZ, 1632 Channel Road, Queens. This is a build-it-back project.
Right, so this is Build It Back. Yeah, we can hear it first, yeah. So, and this one is in the waterfront area that seeks a special permit under section 62-332 for a waiver of the waterfront yard regulations. It's a reconstruction, but I couldn't actually tell whether it's a prefab or it's actually a lift and just a...
No, they're moving it.
They're just moving it, so it's the existing building, it's not a new, one of the prefabs.
The same, I'll check, but they're moving the building.
Yeah, so yeah, the building is literally sitting in the water, and they're sliding it back on the lot, and that means they're reducing the front yard. But what it ends up doing is it improves one of the side yard widths and improves the waterfront rear yard. So, and then as with the others, they're seeking a waiver of the BSA rules, and they must comply with fire department regulations, which are listed, and I'll mention at the hearing. Okay?
We will be taking this out of order, and then also for requests, we have number 6 and number 16. We'll earlier, we have there's conflicting hearings.
Okay. Is that a long six? That's the 6.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to move those to the early in the morning? Okay.
16 is this Avenue Z one.
Avenue Z, okay, that's going to take a while. Right, okay. All right. Great.
This concludes the public review session for August 14, 2017.
Thank you, everybody.